Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. So I have got someone who I just recently met. So Ken gave me a list of people to contact. So we are now in Ken's world. So her name is Tina Tina Huang, and she is a big deal. She is a data scientist for, I can't even say the name of this company. It's an unnamed FANG company. So FANG is Facebook, Apple, what's the other A?
Amazon.
Amazon, Netflix for Google. So one of those companies. And she's got a fascinating story because she pivoted last minute into the data science role. And the conversation we're going to be reading down on today is bridging your skill gap right before an interview. So Tina, you applied for a job that you were not technically qualified for, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And then 11 days before the interview, you started teaching yourself SQL, which was a required skill set. So how did you pull that off? That's a big deal.
Let me actually even expand on that even more. Okay, so not only was I not qualified on the SQL portion of it, I had 2 weeks and I also had to learn the other stuff as well. So my probability stuff was rusty, data sense, and algorithms, all these things. I was just didn't know maybe 70% of what they were gonna ask me.
Oh, wow.
So it was 11 days for SQL, and then the rest of the time I was studying the other things.
Wow. So you don't suffer with imposter syndrome. You're probably like me. My ailment is not imposter syndrome, but it's delusions of grandeur. Like I can do anything.
See, no, I don't, it's not that I don't suffer from imposter syndrome. I always think, I'm just like, oh no, I can't do anything. Even when I just post a video on YouTube, I'm like, oh no, it's going to be terrible. But the good thing about me is I have imposter syndrome, but I do it anyway.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, I guess I have select imposter syndrome. We were talking off air. My first day teaching in person at a university was actually really nerve-wracking because I felt like I was in the spotlight, and it's a whole different dynamic, having to carry and lead the classroom versus sitting in the seat and just being told what to do. So I felt a little overwhelmed there. For sure. So, okay. How did you teach yourself SQL?
Yeah. So I outlined that, I think pretty clearly in my video. So just briefly, what I did was I did it the opposite way as most people would learn a skill set because I didn't have that much time. It's also my personal philosophy where I refuse to do extra work. So the way I structured it was that this unnamed company, I went online and found all the questions that I knew they were going to ask me for this position. The good thing about interviewing for a larger company, if you go on Glassdoor, people are going to write what questions that you're going to be interviewing with. So I went and collected all the questions. So specific to this case, I collected all the SQL questions. So this was pages on Glassdoor, and I would just collect every single question I could find. And then that was kind of my guiding light, my beacon, because I knew that that's where I had to be in 11 days or around 2 weeks, right? So when I was looking at the questions, I had no idea what was happening. Never written a line of SQL before. I didn't even know what a select statement was, but it didn't really matter. I just put everything there. And I actually spent, I think it was the first 2 days, 2 to 3 days maybe doing that. So I feel that's surprising that for a lot of people, when I say I spent a lot of time collecting questions. So after I collected these questions, then I went on mo.com, which is this free resource that teaches you SQL. And I just did everything on the basics and the intermediate level, as well as some of the things from the advanced, which I was able to know I was supposed to do because I looked at the questions, right? So I look at the question, I'm like, oh, this is something that I need to know. For example, I can't even think, CTEs, for example. So I'm like, oh, I need to know this. So then I did that section of the advanced, and I didn't do anything extra. They didn't test me on window functions. It was not listed, so I didn't learn about window functions. I only learned about it afterwards. So I did that. That was probably the next 3 days, I believe. And then I did that and learned everything. I didn't try to memorize anything. I just had to make sure that I understood the structure of it and deeply understood what each statement and what each function actually does. I also did all the questions on the SQL on mo.com that was related for each topic I was covering. And then the rest of the time, which is the majority of the time, I actually spent that doing those questions, the questions that I gathered from Glassdoor. So I held myself to a really high standard. So I knew that my final round, which is the case for most big companies, is going to be whiteboarding. The sequel is going to be whiteboarding. I have to write a perfect query. I can have like some small syntax errors, but the goal is to have a perfect query that would actually run. So that's the standard that I held myself to. And I also did it in the style that I knew the interview would be held in. So I would take like a question, I would write that down, and then I would write down the steps I would be taking, and then write down the query, talk through it, and explain what was happening, just like how I would in an interview. Granted, I looked a little bit insane because I was just sitting there talking to myself, but that's okay. You need to get it
totally look. If you look goofy, that's fine. Just get it done.
Exactly. I'm just like, you know what? And you know what the good thing is? When you talk to yourself, people will stare at you, but they wouldn't say anything. But if you talk to other people, they get mad, right? So they would just stare at me, but that's okay. I just did that. And I did, I did that for all the questions that I gathered. I think I actually ended up finishing all of them, if I recall correctly. And that was tough. Like I wasn't like doing a few questions a day or anything. I was like spending a significant amount of time doing this and always holding myself to the highest standard and then testing out my solutions as well. So I would enter it onto, it's called like EB SQL. It's also a free resource where you can check your queries. So I also made sure that I got the question right. If I didn't get it right, then I wrote down and I would do the question again. And the second time I made sure that I got it perfectly. So yeah, that's briefly what I did.
So 2 things. Thank you. You just taught me something new. I didn't know about Glassdoor. Well, so that is some golden advice right there. Glassdoor, people put the interview questions on there. I had no idea. That's huge. I mean, that's like your blueprint of what you need to prepare yourself for. And then 2, I absolutely agree with you on your philosophy for learning. That's how I learned analytics, actually. Like, so I came out of my MBA and I had some like basic foundation of analytics courses, but learning kind of like from a textbook, like the bullet points, isn't an immersive, like practicum based approach. So then when I started taking on consulting clients, I would sell deals that I didn't know how to do. And I had to learn them or I wouldn't get the money. So, I mean, you're kind of hacking education in a way because there are stakes. Like grades are kind of stakes, but like you can, retake the class or, you're still going to pass whether you get an A or a B or maybe a C. But I love that because you kind of put yourself in a pressure cooker. Like, I have to get this done now. Mm-hmm. And it like expanded you. Like you now. So what was your track before? You're going down like the management consultant track?
Yeah, so this is like a weird thing. I did pharmacology for my undergraduate when I was pre-med, and I decided I would be, a terrible doctor. So I stopped doing that. And then I went to bioinformatics where I worked in a year. I can't talk today. I worked on that for a year. And then I did my master's in computer science.
Wait, can I pause you right fast?
Yes.
Have you talked to Angela Baltez yet?
Who?
Angela Baltez. So she was a podcast guest for us for a few weeks back. She has a PhD in, I think, bioinformatics. You guys should totally hook up and like have an interviews. Like I checked out her profile recently, and she has like in the feature section, my podcast episode with her. I'm sure you guys could totally like nerd out in the bioinformatics space.
Yeah. We were talking as well. Data professor Chenin, he's also a bioinformatics professor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We all like have a chat.
Yeah, have a Zoom call and just record it. Let everyone like just absorb all the knowledge.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were studied bioinformatics, and then what happened next?
Yeah. So I was studying, and then I did my master's in computer science at the University of Pennsylvania. So I was just like, basically I was doing bioinformatics, and then I decided that, having a CS degree is going to really help me out. So I did that. And then I interned at Goldman Sachs. And basically I really didn't like it. So I was doing like the software engineering stuff. And I got an offer from Amazon for my internship and also from Goldman Sachs. But I ended up going with Goldman Sachs because they said I can do like machine learning and data science stuff. So I was like, okay, so I went with Goldman Sachs. but like, you know, people were really nice and they were like, you know, very, very kind, and the work was also very like impactful and significant, but it just wasn't for me. It was just too technical, and I'm pretty extroverted. So basically, if you tell me to sit there and code all day, I will get very distressed. Um, so I was like, no, I'm just gonna do management consulting, you know, go completely the opposite direction. And you see, I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll just like, you know, go to the interview and talk myself in, and yeah, no, that did not work. Apparently you have to prepare for years to go in to do an interview. So I completely failed every single interview that I got, except for like one in the end. So I was
Wow.
basically very sad. I was like, oh no, like what should I do? And then I figured out like, you know, there's this, and I was like, okay, might as well just like try out data science again. So I started applying for more data science positions. And that's how I ended up where I am now. So it was a roller coaster throughout.
Wow. Well, you seem very, very resourceful though. So what I'm noticing from, well, so I'm teaching some sophomores, a couple juniors, and then mostly seniors. Some of the kind of like lower classmen, they expect you to spoon feed them, like walk them through it. You seem to be able to make these connections on your own, and it's like the difference between knowing how to fish and just being given a fish every day.
You know, I would honestly, I talk about this with Kenji as well in our interview. I would attribute that more to me being just a not very good student. So I would be like the kid that never showed up to class,
Yeah.
you know, so I gotta like pass my classes somehow, right? So this is I just something that I've kind of learned throughout the years. Like if I don't go to class, I don't know what's happening, how are you supposed to pass your exams and your midterms? Well, you gotta study the thing they're gonna ask you about, right? So
You know what's hilarious? Is I literally said this to the students. So at Greensboro College, I'm kind of taking on their analytics. So I've been on the advisory council for about a year and a half, advising them on rolling out an analytics minor. And I'm teaching a class called Case Studies in Business Analytics and the capstone, where they're going to be actually working with some of my consulting clients. And I was literally, they handpicked the top 7 students out of that business school. And I was talking to them, I was like, it's kind of hilarious that I'm teaching you guys because I was a terrible student. I was so bad. I was lazy. Well, it's like there's this certain thing about being like lazy in that it forces you to be strategic. And then so my trajectory was I went to UNCW, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, got a degree in economics, barely skated by, like put in the minimal amount of effort to get a 3.0 because I knew I may want to go to grad school later. And then I sold insurance for 3 years, door to door, like getting rejected 15 to 20 times every day, just like soul crushing work. And then I decided to go back and get a master's degree. And that's when I worked really hard because I knew it was at stake. Like there was this existential crisis of like, if you don't nail this time, then you're going to have to go back and be unhappy. And I knew what that was like. So the second time around, I was strategic and I worked hard. So that combination, but I've noticed that a lot about a lot of like successful people that I've come across. They weren't like the good boys or good girls in school. It's like something happened and then they kind of got things together.
I can see that because I feel like the people who are really good students, they're the ones that you find, for example, business school, you know, working in management consulting, where like, you know, investment banking, like those kind of things. It's almost like because you always were good at everything that you didn't need to find alternatives. It's like people, you know, kind of like you and me, you know, we're like, you know, this the thing is, it's not that we're not ambitious. If we literally just didn't care, that would have been fine as well, right? It would be like, okay, whatever. But we still care, so you gotta figure out some way of doing it.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm also a bit of a contrarian by nature. Like I'm a bit of a provocateur.
Interesting.
I don't do well with authority, which is why. I mean, the episode with Kenji where I was interviewed on his channel hasn't come out yet, but basically we both said like we're unemployable, like we can't work for anybody. Like it's the ultimate irony that I'm teaching you how to get an analytics job and I can't be employed. I mean, that being said, like I'm in a unique position because I'm placing people with my consulting clients. And then also now that I'm in the education space, I'm really sorry. I'm almost treating these 4 months of this semester like a customer interview, to where like I'm seeing where the students are and where the marketplace is, and kind of finding the gaps in the marketplace. Because personal branding seems to be a huge one that I don't think students quite understand, like how to market themselves.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you about this on our episode. I have so many questions for you.
Really, on personal branding.
Yes, I'm really interested in the work that you're doing, but I digress on this episode because that's something I've just been really interested in, and I come from a very kind of like technical background. It was academic and then technical, so that's the part that I just never really touched, and I'm kind of feeling it out. So it's like I'm trying to do my own YouTube channel right now. That's when I started thinking about this kind of stuff for the first time ever. Right, I needed to brand myself. I needed to like think about what I was doing, and I couldn't just like think about things in a very technical way anymore. So yeah, I'm really excited.
All right, so let's close out this interview on this question. So how did you bring all these opportunities into your life? So like to supersede, so I'm super impressed, and thank you for like, you've expanded my knowledge base here. Like that whole Glassdoor concept, that's a super hack. Thank you, that's awesome. But before you're like put in those positions to be interviewed for these like massive tech companies, like how did you get into that position to even start with?
I'm glad that you asked that question. This comes back to my personal philosophy as well. I call it like the minimize effort and maximize outcome philosophy, known as usually the 80-20 rule. It's the fact that, yes, exactly. It's not that I don't put in effort at all. I put in effort in places that matter. So for example, I always tell people, if you're in school, the best way of getting into like data science, for example, is to get a research position, right? So I started off in the academic group by getting a research position, and I spent an enormous amount of time getting that research position, and that's kind of what got my foot in the door with bioinformatics. I would literally I didn't like go stalk the professors, but I would essentially talk to everybody in their lab. I mean, like, why would that guy hire me? I had like no coding background at that time. I didn't really know anything. So if I just like emailed him like, hey, can you like hire me? He's probably gonna say no, right? So I gotta figure out some way to actually get him to say yes. So I talked to people in that lab. I would also send emails, and I would just be really open to grab any opportunity that was available. And I sent out like 70, 80, like 100 emails to different professors trying to get that position. And with the companies, like when I was applying for when I was getting my internship, my master's degree, I actually also thought about that. I couldn't get a data science position just off the bat because nobody would actually interview me for a data science position. So that's why I applied for software engineering. Because I knew if I managed to get in as a software engineer, then I could probably ask them if I could work on data, which is what I did afterwards. So I applied with the skill set that I had and tried to use that to the greatest advantage that I could as well. And for that software engineering internship, I also applied to like hundreds of places, right? And out of that, I got 2 offers, right? So, not a very high click-through rate, or like, whatever you call it.
Conversion rate, yeah.
Conversion rate, yeah, exactly. And even here, when I was doing the management consulting stuff, I was just applying for so many places. I was networking. I was doing everything I could to do the things that I knew I wanted in the end.
Interesting. Yeah, well, so you're kind of hacking this already. Just the fact that you're putting your YouTube channel together, and you just broke 1,000 subscribers?
Yes, I just did.
That's a big deal.
So excited.
Yeah, so getting yourself out there and kind of turning on your personal brand, it's weird to see that this is actually converting to opportunities. Do you know Michael Galarnik?
No.
So he's also a published LinkedIn author like I am, and we recorded through the same startup called Madecraft out in Santa Barbara. And he came on my podcast because like I saw that we both had put out content with them, and it actually, him coming on my podcast, they saw the interview and asked him to create another course based on something that he talked about he was doing in the interview. So like putting together a podcast, putting together video content, even just posting on LinkedIn. That's how I got my teaching position at High Point University. So Daniel Hall, the economics chair, he actually took one of my online courses like 2 years ago. And then he saw my podcast, or actually I went on, you've probably heard of Super Data Science, right?
The what?
Have you heard of Super Data Science?
I literally haven't heard of anything you're telling me about.
This is
You
wild.
gotta link me. You gotta link me
Okay.
after.
All right. So Super Data Science is probably the biggest podcast like in the data science space. I mean, do you listen to any data science podcasts?
No, I guess I didn't. I see the only ones that I knew were Data Professor and Kenji. Those are the two data science YouTubers that I knew about.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, Super Data Science is huge. Super Data Science, I would say, is probably on par with, Ken did a course with 365 Data Careers or something like that, right? So they're kind of competitors on the Udemy marketplace. Like they both put out, like I just recorded a course with Super Data Science on the new Power BI certification exam. And I wouldn't be shocked or surprised if Data Science 365 put out a competitor course to compete with me in that market. But anyways, getting back to that, I was on that big podcast. Daniel Hall of the Economic Chair at HPU listened to that, asked me if he wanted to come on my podcast, if I would be open to him coming on my podcast, and then 3 days later, he offered me a job teaching Excel at High Point University. So it's weird how amplifying your voice like this can bring in so many opportunities, not only to me, but like people kind of in my, like you've got kind of like this data science crew that you're like hanging out with. And
Yeah.
they're super, I mean, Ken's huge. I mean, he's got like what, 81,000 subscribers at this point.
Yeah, something like that.
It's awesome. Cool. Well, I guess that pretty much wraps it up. So how can people find you?
Sorry?
I said, how can people find you?
Oh, how can people find me? Check out my YouTube channel. Also, reach out to me on LinkedIn. So if you really want to get in touch with me, YouTube, I respond very quickly in terms of comments. And I'm also pretty good with LinkedIn, especially if you comment on YouTube that you message me on LinkedIn. I'm very good at getting back to you as well.
Awesome. Well, yeah, go check her out. Comment on all of her videos. That'll boost the algorithm so she'll get more exposure. But Tina, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. This is so much fun.
Yeah.